Hello there. I'm Jennifer, just your typical straightforward person, but I've got quite a tale to tell. It's a story about heartbreak, resilience, and unexpected strength. A few years ago, life threw me a curveball I never expected. My husband Frank and I were living what seemed like the ideal life: a cozy suburban home, our dog Billy, and dreams of starting a family. Then, unexpectedly, our path took a sharp turn. I suffered a miscarriage, and it struck us hard, like a relentless punch that never eased. It shook our minds, hearts, and particularly our marriage. Suddenly, we found ourselves navigating through immense pain and confusion. Frank and I have always been a solid team, committed to staying strong together. However, this miscarriage cast a persistent shadow over us, touching every aspect of our relationship. Conversations often turned into arguments, simple joys were hard to share, and our closeness began to fade. To add to the strain, there was Betty, my mother-in-law, who had been eager for grandchildren since our wedding. The pressure from her felt like a ticking clock, adding stress to our already heavy hearts. Despite numerous doctor visits, treatments, and the emotional toll, my fertility issues persisted. The roller coaster of hope and despair with each pregnancy attempt was overwhelming. Every positive test ended in heartache, and the repeated losses were crushing. I remember the devastating conversations with Frank where hope and frustration poured out in our words. "It's not fair, Jennifer. We've tried so hard," Frank would say, his voice heavy with disappointment. "I know, Frank, I never wanted this," I'd respond, feeling the weight of our shared dreams crumbling. Life seemed to relentlessly challenge us, and the burden grew with each passing year. Friends and family offered support, but the journey of trying to have a baby remained daunting. It was a profound weight that constantly loomed over us, becoming heavier as time went on. Through all these trials, Frank and I learned about the depths of our strength and the resilience of our bond. The path wasn't easy, but it was ours, filled with lessons about love, hardship, and the complex journey of life. Our friends and family couldn't help but notice that Frank and I were still without children. Their well-meaning inquiries and comments about when we might have a little one often felt more like pressure than support. But Betty, Frank's mom, took it to another level entirely. Every family gathering with her turned into a relentless probe into our plans to start a family. She often seemed to point the finger at me, as if the absence of children was solely my fault, especially since I was dealing with fertility issues. However, her approach was far from tactful. "Oh, Jennifer, it's so nice to see you. How have you been?" Betty would start sweetly. "I've been good, Betty, thanks for asking," I'd respond, bracing myself for what was to come. "And any good news to share? About a little one on the way?" "Betty, we've talked about this. We're still trying, but it's not that simple," I'd reply, trying to keep my tone light. "Oh dear, are you sure you're doing everything right? You've been married for quite some time now. Maybe it's time to see a specialist." "Yes, Betty, we've seen specialists. We're doing everything we can. It's just not happening as easily as you might think." "Well, maybe you should try some natural remedies. I've heard herbal teas and certain positions can help. I really want a grandbaby. "This is a private matter, Betty. We're handling it the best we can," I'd insist, hoping to steer the conversation away. "Oh, please, Private Schmivat. We're family. We should be able to discuss these things openly." "I understand that, Betty, but let's just enjoy our time together today without discussing this, okay?" "All right, dear, but tick-tock, time is wasting and soon you won't be able to have kids." "I'll keep that in mind, Betty." It was always like this, trust me. I felt immense pressure and shame for not fulfilling her expectations of a perfect daughter-in-law who would provide her with grandchildren. Ironically, she never imposed such expectations on her daughter, who wasn't even married yet, and seemed to get a free pass. It was incredibly frustrating. This period in our lives was tremendously difficult. The pressure from Betty just kept building, and it felt like she was always holding my fertility struggles against me. I could see the strain it was putting on both Frank and me. I suggested adoption several times, but Frank was adamant about having a biological child, which led to heated arguments between us. The tension from these discussions and the constant external pressure made everything even more challenging. I expressed to Frank how painful and unfair it felt to make a distinction between biological and adopted children because, to me, all children deserved love equally. Yet, he remained fixated on having a biological child, a desire that weighed heavily on both our hearts. I couldn't help but think of the countless children out there longing for a family, a thought that deepened my sadness. As for Betty, her attitude escalated to being overtly harsh. She relentlessly blamed me for our inability to have children, as if my fertility issues were something I could simply resolve if I just tried harder. This created an unbearable situation where I was fighting to preserve my marriage while enduring constant judgment and reproach. It was a draining ordeal, emotionally overwhelming. Betty never hesitated to express her dissatisfaction directly. "Jennifer, you need to fix this and fast. You're the reason we don't have any grandchildren yet," she would confront me. "Betty, I've been trying everything I can. It's not as simple as you think. I'm dealing with fertility issues," I would respond, my patience thinning. "Well, you need to try harder. We can't have our family line end with you," she retorted. Her fixation seemed almost dystopian, as if she expected me to fulfill some sort of Handmaid's Tale scenario. Overwhelmed, I decided to seek some insight from my sister-in-law, Amy, who always seemed more empathetic. "Amy, I don't understand why your mom is so fixated on me having a baby. It's not entirely under my control, and she's making my life miserable," I confided. "Jennifer, it's not just about grandkids." Amy hesitated, hinting at more to the story. After some coaxing, she revealed more troubling thoughts. I overheard her talking to some family friends. "Mom's worried that Frank might leave you for someone younger, someone who can have kids." "What? Frank would never do that. Why would you even think that?" I was shocked. "I know you believe that, but remember, Frank was quite the ladies' man before. I didn't want to say anything. After all, he's my brother, and I'm loyal to him. You're lucky I'm even sharing this with you." "Honestly, I think Mom might have a point," Amy admitted reluctantly. "Yeah, Jennifer, time is ticking," she added, echoing the harsh reality that seemed to hover around us. This revelation shook me deeply, intertwining my marital uncertainties with the invasive pressures from Betty, adding layers of complexity to an already strained relationship. Hearing about Frank potentially leaving me for someone younger left me staggered. Amy hinted at a younger coworker, an intern about 25 years old with whom Frank seemed to enjoy chatting a bit too much. The thought that my husband could even contemplate leaving me, let alone engage with other women behind my back, was shattering. My heart felt like it was being torn apart by this potential betrayal. After grappling with my suspicions and the agony they caused, I reached a breaking point. The distance between Frank and me had become an unbridgeable chasm, and I knew it was time for a confrontation. One evening, Frank sensed my withdrawal and standoffishness and asked me about it. Overwhelmed by pain and frustration, I confronted him directly about his fidelity. Initially, Frank denied everything, as anyone might in such a shocking scenario. But as the conversation stretched on, he eventually confessed to his indiscretions. The revelation of his affair with a younger coworker unleashed a torrent of emotions in me. In a moment of intense anger and hurt, I slapped him, the act a stark reflection of the pain he had inflicted. Frank's reaction was predictably mixed with pleas and request for forgiveness, but I could see right through it. Over the years, I had built a stable and prosperous life for myself, making wise financial decisions, and advancing in my career. It dawned on me that Frank might have been holding on to our failing marriage not just because of love or the desire for a child, but perhaps also with an eye on securing a financial safety net through potential child support payments in the event of a divorce. Feeling manipulated and used, I declared that I wanted a divorce. I was exhausted by the deceit and the emotional turmoil. "How could you, Frank? How could you betray me like this?" I demanded. "Jennifer, please, just listen. I messed up. I know I did. I'm so sorry," he pleaded, his voice desperate. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Frank. You cheated on me with someone from your office," I shot back, my voice trembling with rage. "Jennifer, you have to understand. I was feeling so inadequate, so unfulfilled. I thought having a child would make me feel completely like I was worth something," he tried to explain. "Oh, so you thought cheating on your wife was the solution? Did you think that sleeping with someone else would magically make you a better person?" I countered, disbelief and scorn lacing my words. At that moment, the truth of our situation became painfully clear. Frank's betrayal wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate choice that shattered the trust and foundation of our marriage. "No, of course not. I was foolish to think that way. I didn't know what else to do," Frank stammered, his desperation evident. "You didn't know what to do, so you chose to hurt me instead? Do you even realize the pain you've caused?" I demanded, my voice tinged with disbelief and hurt. "Jennifer, I can't lose you. Please let me make this right. I'll do anything," he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "Do you really think you can undo this with a few hollow promises? You need to mature, Frank, and take responsibility for your actions," I replied sternly, my resolve firming. As I sat in the lawyer's office signing the final divorce papers, a profound sense of relief swept through me. The burden of a broken marriage and the sting of Frank's betrayal was finally lifting. I could breathe freely again, despite attempts by Betty and Amy to make me reconsider. Their attempts couldn't mask the deceit they too had harbored. I knew what was right for me, and staying with a man who had been unfaithful was no longer an option. With the prenuptial agreement in place, the divorce proceedings were swift. I retained the house, a sanctuary where I could start anew. Frank, on the other hand, had to move back in with his mother, a situation he found less than ideal. On the day the divorce was finalized, I left the lawyer's office feeling liberated from a toxic relationship. However, as I drove home, a sudden wave of nausea overwhelmed me. I quickly pulled over, stumbled out of the car, and barely made it to the roadside before I threw up. The twisting in my stomach at first seemed like the emotional toll of the divorce catching up to me. But as the nausea persisted over the following days, I began to suspect there might be more to it. The very next day, I was jolted awake by an incessant ringing of my doorbell. To my dismay, it was Frank, Betty, and Amy causing a commotion outside. They barged into my home uninvited, shouting about the prenuptial agreement and how it was unfair to leave Frank with so little, considering my financial status. Betty wasted no time in cutting to the chase. "Jennifer, we're here to collect some money as compensation for all the years Frank wasted with you," she declared brazenly. "Have you lost your mind? Don't you realize the divorce is finalized?" I retorted, incredulous at their audacity and the absurdity of their demands. Their presence in my home, making such outrageous claims, was the last thing I needed after everything that had transpired. "I don't owe him anything." "Sure, I guess, but this sounds like some sort of side deal, right?" Frank argued, trying to justify his demand. "A side deal, yes," he insisted. "Jennifer, you've put me through a lot and I need compensation. You're lucky we aren't taking this to court." Amy nodded in agreement beside him. "Yeah, he's been through so much stress because of you. We think $150,000 should cover it." I was stunned by their audacity. A fire ignited within me as I faced them, my voice quivering with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Are you kidding me? Do you think you deserve compensation for the years I spent trying to make our marriage work? If anything, I'm the one who deserves compensation," I exclaimed. I knew Frank was practically broke and there was no way he could pay me anything. Yet here they were, attempting to bully me into giving them money. I refused to be intimidated. With renewed resolve, I declared, "The whole point of a prenup is to protect my assets. You need to leave my house immediately." But I paused, a plan forming in my mind to truly shock them. "Wait just one moment before I do. I need to show you something." I hurried upstairs, my heart pounding in anticipation. When I returned, I held a pregnancy test in my trembling hand. Their eyes widened with shock and disbelief as they saw the positive result. As they passed the test around, I explained, "I threw up last night and decided to take the test on a whim." The result was unexpected, to say the least. Later that day, I had a hospital appointment to determine how far along I was in the pregnancy. Frank, Betty, and Amy stood there, jaws practically on the floor, unable to comprehend the twist of fate that had just unfolded before them. "You know what, Betty, Amy? Karma is a real piece of work, and I guess the universe decided it was time to bless me. I'm having a baby, but I'm no longer tied to any of you. The baby might be Frank's, but this baby is going to be all mine," I declared firmly. Betty and Amy exchanged worried Betty before Betty spoke up. "Jennifer, let's not be too hasty here. We could work something out and discuss an arrangement." Frank, finally finding his voice, mumbled incoherent apologies, his eyes brimming with regret. But I wasn't having any of it. I'd had enough of their manipulation and toxicity. "No more arrangements, no more excuses. Get off my property, all of you, before I call the police. I'm done with this toxic circus," I stated resolutely, my decision firm. Betty and Amy exchanged worried Betty as I stood my ground. I could sense their desperation to change my mind, but after years of enduring their emotional pressure, I was unwavering. I had constructed an emotional barrier that was not easily breached. In our tense standoff, Betty broke the silence, her voice tinged with desperation. "Jennifer, you have to understand that we care about this family. We want what's best for you and the baby. Frank may have made mistakes that you knew about, by the way, but that's not important right now. He's the father, and he has a right to be in his baby's life." "Yeah, Jennifer, you know how long we've been waiting for this. We can make this work, trust me," she continued, trying to persuade me. I sighed, struggling to keep my composure. "I understand your concern, but what you fail to grasp is that Frank's actions caused this rift in our marriage. He cheated on me, Betty. You're a smart woman. I'm sure you don't even believe what you're saying. You three are just trying to get into my life to get access to my money." "That's ridiculous." "Yes, I agree. You're taking these things too far." Frank finally chimed in, his voice shaky. "Jennifer, I messed up big time. I regret what I did, and I'm willing to make amends for the sake of our child. Can't we try to work this out?" I looked at him, my eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "Frank, this isn't just about your infidelity. It's about years of emotional manipulation and pressure from your mother and sister. I've endured so much because of your family, and I can't go back to that toxic environment." Amy tried a different approach, her voice softer, trying to sound conciliatory. "Jennifer, we admit we made mistakes too. We were too pushy, and we're sorry for that. But we only wanted what was best for you, even if we went about it the wrong way. Please, for the sake of the family, reconsider." But I wasn't swayed. "Sure, Amy, but it doesn't change what happened. I've made my decision. I want a fresh start for myself and my child, away from the constant pressure and guilt trips, so thanks, but no thanks." Betty, clearly frustrated, raised her voice. "You're being unreasonable, Jennifer. You can't just cut us out like this." I took a deep breath, my patience wearing thin. "I can, and I will. My priority now is the well-being of my child," I asserted firmly. Their attempts at reconciliation felt shallow, and their motives were transparent. In that moment, I knew I needed to stand strong, not just for myself, but for the future of my child, free from the turmoil and the strings attached by Frank and his family. I had decided not to expose my child to such a toxic environment. "You all need to leave," I stated, my voice resolute. Amy's eyes welled up as her voice shook. "Jennifer, please don't do this. We love you and we want to be the part of your life and the baby's life. As I've mentioned, you can have a relationship with the baby, but I will not compromise my happiness and mental health for anyone. Please, I don't want to have to repeat myself," I asserted, trying to maintain my calm. Frank, who had been quietly weeping throughout the conversation, finally spoke up, his voice cracking with emotion. "Jennifer, please reconsider. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I'm sorry about those girls. They meant nothing." I looked at him, feeling a pang for the man I once loved. "Frank, it's too late for us, but you can still be a good father to our child. Just remember that actions speak louder than words." With that, I turned and walked away, locking my door behind them. Betty, Amy, and Frank were left standing there, their faces a mix of sadness and regret. It was time to start a new chapter in my life, one where I could breathe freely without the weight of their expectations and demands. Life had indeed taken a turn for the better. I had my beautiful baby girl, who became the center of my universe. She was healthy, thriving, and a source of immeasurable joy in my life. Each day spent with her filled my heart with love and gratitude. I had decided to allow supervised visits with Frank, Betty, and Amy, as I believed that my daughter deserved to know her father and have a connection with her paternal family. However, I had set clear boundaries, and I expected those boundaries to be respected. Yet, every visit seemed to be accompanied by the same chorus of pleas and accusations. They insisted that I was being selfish for not reuniting with Frank. The pressure and guilt-tripping were relentless, and it began to wear on my patience. One day, during yet another supervised visit, the familiar arguments began. Betty and Amy launched into their usual tirade about how I was tearing the family apart. They claimed that I was depriving my daughter of a complete family and that she deserved to have her parents together. I had had enough. After gently placing my baby girl in her crib, I turned to face them, my voice firm yet weary. "I've been patient," I began, ready to reassert my boundaries and stand up for the peaceful life I had fought so hard to create for my daughter and myself. I've strived to maintain a civil relationship for the sake of our child, but the constant badgering and shouting are simply unacceptable. When Frank attempted to intervene, saying, "Jennifer, please, can't we talk about this?" I firmly shook my head. "No, Frank, this isn't up for debate. I've made my decision and it's final. I won't tolerate this environment for our daughter," I declared, my resolve clear. Betty and Amy exchanged frustrated Betty but continued to argue, accusing me of being rigid and unreasonable. Taking a deep breath, I addressed them sternly. "This is your last warning. If you can't respect my boundaries and continue to pressure me, you won't be allowed to see her anymore. I won't expose her to this toxic behavior." Frank, realizing the gravity of the situation, finally stepped in. "Mom, Amy, please, we need to respect Jennifer's wishes. Our daughter deserves a peaceful and loving environment," he pleaded. Betty and Amy fell silent, their faces a mix of disappointment and resignation. It seemed they finally understood that their constant interference was only pushing them further away from their granddaughter. From that day forward, our visits became more peaceful. They still harbored hopes for a reunion between Frank and me, but they no longer pressed the issue during our visits. Though I could tell they were still remorseful, my focus remained elsewhere. I had more important things to prioritize, like the well-being and happiness of my daughter, who continued to thrive. She was surrounded by love from people who genuinely cared about her well-being and mine. The change in the dynamics allowed us to foster a calmer, more nurturing environment, one that was free from the previous tensions and conducive to her growth and happiness.